Hey everyone, this is Math Done Right, and in this video we're going to be talking about composition of functions. So let's say I have two functions, f of x and g of x. Now, the way a function works is I have some sort of rule, like f of x equals x plus 2. If I want to find f of 4, well, wherever there's an x in my function, I replace it with 4 and I evaluate it, right? And I get 6, for example. But what if I wanted to evaluate it at g of x? Well, that's simple. I just do f of g of x, and now wherever there's an x in my f function, I replace it with g of x. So it's going to be g of x plus 2. And g of x can be any function. I didn't give it a rule this time, but in these examples I will, and we'll see how to fully evaluate that out. But all I do is I just replace my x in here, my x over here with f, with g of x, and I get g of x plus 2 for the composition. Now another way to write this is f composed with g of x, and that's the same thing. Sometimes this is called fog and goff because I could also do g of x. And for g of x, I would be taking my f function and plugging it into g. So you go from the right to the left when you're looking at composition of functions. So let's look at an example of composition. Alrighty. So let's give two functions f of x equals, let's stick with that x plus 2 again. Then let's say g of x is x squared plus 5. Alright, so the first thing I want to do is just find what f of g of x is, and we know it's the same thing as f of g of x. So my rule for f is whatever my input is I take that input and I add 2 to it. So here my input is g of x, so I'm going to have x squared plus 5. So that's replacing x right here, and now I have to add 2. And when I evaluate that out, that gives me x squared plus 7. So that's f composed with g of x. Now what if I wanted to find f of g of, let's do 2. Well, I already have my function f of g of x is this x squared plus 7. So this is what I use to evaluate f composed with g when x equals 2. So all I do is I replace this x with a 2, and I square it and add 7, and that gives me 11. Alright, now there's another way I could have done this, because if you notice right here, I did g of x first. So what if I do g of 2 first? So if I do f of g of 2, well, first you do what's inside the parentheses, so I evaluate what g of 2 is. And g of 2, let's go off to the side right here. G of 2 is equal to 2 squared plus 5. Whoops. 2 squared plus 5, and that's equal to 9. So now for g of 2, I replace that with a 9, and now I do f of 9. And f says that I replace x with 9, add 2 to it, and I get 11. And I get the same result. Alright, so now I'm going to flip it on this next slide and do g composed with f of x. Whoops. Alright, so I'm still going to use the same functions. F of x is x plus 2, and g of x is x squared plus 5. But now I'm going to do g composed with f of x. Alright, so that's the same thing as g of f of x. And now this is my g function, and it says to take my input, which is x, square it, and add 5. So I take my function f, and I'm going to square that, and then add 5 to it. Now, I know that x plus 2 squared, I'm going to go do that off to the side just to help you guys out. So x plus 2 squared is the same thing as x plus 2 times x plus 2. And now I got to FOIL this out, and that's going to give me that x times x is x squared, x times 2 is 2x, 2 times x is 2x, 2 times 2 is 4. Ooh, I left off an x there. And that's x squared plus 4x plus 4. So this is equal to this guy right here. So this is x squared plus 4x plus 4. And I still have this plus 5 here. Now I can combine these two to give me x squared plus 4x plus 9. So this is what g of f of x is, or you can say g composed with f of x. Now let's do g of f of, let's make this a little easy. Let's do 0. So this is the function I'm using to evaluate g composed with f when x is 0. So it's going to give me 0 squared plus 4 times 0 plus 9. Now 0 squared is 0, so that's dead. 4 times 0 is 0, so that's dead. All I'm left with is this plus 9. And just like what I did in the last slide, I'm going to try to do g of f of 0, because this is the same thing as this. So I need to find what f of 0 is first, and that's going to be off to the side. I'll do that. F of 0, f of 0 is 0 plus 2, which is 2. So now that's g of 2. And my g function is up here, right? So I do 2 squared plus 5, and I get 9. So either way works, just whatever is easier for you. Doesn't really matter because it's the same thing. And that's how composition of functions works, and also evaluating different values of x for composition of functions. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe, share my channel with everyone you know. Alright, bye.